Hello, beautiful, and welcome to the Moms Talks Sex podcast. I'm your host, Maury Yelvington of Morph Transform Your Reality, where I help women step out of trauma and reclaim their power. I'm so happy to have you here for this open conversation about moms, sex, motherhood, children, relationships, marriage, and everything in between. So grab your drink of choice and let's dive in. I'm so honored to have the beautiful Sharon with me here today. Hi, Sharon.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. And we just talked a little bit in the background, but how about you introduce yourself a little bit and let our listeners know who you are?
Yeah, so I'm Sharon Costanzo and I'm a relationship coach. I focus on helping women to improve their communication in their relationships so that they can feel more seen and heard, and so that they can be working through some of those issues that keep coming up. So that's my focus. I live in Utah. My husband Mario and I have been married for 10 and a half years, and we have two kids that are 6 and 8. So we're just in kind of this really fun but really busy period of our lives with our careers and our kids and everything else that's going on.
I love that. And I'm so honored that you're here because I feel like your story is really going to share some light and awareness to so many of the moms and women that are listening to this podcast, and really help them maybe find themselves in your story. And that's why I thought it was so beautiful to bring you and have you share that. So why don't we just dive into that?
Yeah, sure. So I grew up in Salt Lake City, Utah. It's a very conservative Christian community here. And so a lot of the messaging that I got around sex growing up had that kind of very conservative Christian flavor to it. My parents, honestly, they did not talk about sex at all, but I was a pretty intuitive kid, a pretty insightful kid, I guess, very observant. So I kind of just learned what I learned about sex just from observing the people around me. Utah has pretty terrible sex education as well, if you don't know that. But anyways, I got married a little bit later in life than most of my peers. I was 27 years old, which doesn't seem young for most places, but it's young here, and it's doesn't seem old for most places, but it is here. So anyways, that's kind of the groundwork. I met my husband Mario when I was 27, and we got married when I was 26 when I married him. Anyway, I met him. But anyways, I was a little bit older. I was a virgin when I got married, and my husband was not. And so the thing that happened, I had certain expectations just based on what I heard. Nobody really explicitly talked to me about anything. And honestly, when I share that now, it's kind of unbelievable to me that I was 27 years old and I knew so little about sex and sexuality. I was probably pretty sexually repressed just because it was so important to me to be a good girl.
Yeah.
All growing up. So I just appreciate you like creating an open and safe place to share that. But my husband and I got married, and I had a career, and he was the first guy that I met that didn't seem like intimidated or put off by the fact that I had my own career goals and ambitions. And I had just assumed that that attitude he had towards me in that way would also kind of translate into our more intimate relationship, that he would be more open-minded about our sexual relationship than he was. But he came into it with a certain set of expectations, and they were probably made a whole lot of sense based on the culture that we grew up in. Very much centered on that pleasure was for the man, that him being happy with our relationship was more important than me being happy with our relationship, our sexual relationship. And I didn't really know quite what to make of all of that when we were first married. And honestly, it was pretty traumatic to me to feel like he's getting what he wants, or I'm trying to fulfill his needs in this way, and when I ask for what I want, it's not being considered. And I would have friends kind of tell me how things were going in their relationship. And I was like, that's not happening for me. I'm trying to
Yeah.
tell my husband I'm not satisfied. And he'll just say, or, I'm not experiencing pleasure in the same way as you are. I hadn't figured out and how to orgasm for
Yeah.
several years into our marriage. And I would try and talk to him about that. And he would just dismiss me. Oh, well, it's probably because of the medication that you're taking. Or, the other girls that I have been with have it's been this way and they've been fine with it, that kind of a thing. So there was a lot of shame and I was very confused about, I know that he's a good person, but this doesn't feel good to me. How do I make it better? It was traumatic. Like, I don't have a better word for it than it was traumatic.
I feel like that is something that so many women deal with, especially in the society where, yeah, it's all around the men and the men has to be pleasured. And as women, or especially women that grew up with a religious background, you're not allowed to touch your body. You're not allowed to explore your body. You don't even know what that means. You don't know what it looks like. And then again, you're thrown into a marriage where, yeah, you're supposed to take care of the man and you don't even know what that entails. And so many women are thrown into that situation. And then again, you can't talk about it. You don't know how to talk about it. You don't know how to bring it up because you don't even know what's missing most of the times. I feel like you don't even know what's really wrong, right? A lot of times we go into self-reflect, like, I am to blame, I am to shame, I'm not doing my wifely duties. And so that is something that you definitely don't go outside to look for help most of the time because of the shame factor.
Yeah, for sure. And, I maybe had two people in my life during that time that I felt comfortable talking about sex to. And I was like, even just like, I don't know what an orgasm feels like, and I don't know how to experience that in my marriage. And because they had never had that experience of not knowing how to do it, and then crossing that, crossing that bridge, so to speak, their advice wasn't really helpful. And, as I learned in some of my own study and then working with a therapist as well, like, women are so different in how they experience sexual pleasure. And, relying on my husband, who had had a few sexual partners, was not helpful either, because he just expected, and who knows if maybe some of his girlfriends weren't being completely honest with him about what they were experiencing. So he was basing what he expected from me off of probably pretty inaccurate information. One of the things, to be very blunt and open, like, he expected oral sex, but he didn't think that he had to return. And he was like, well, I don't enjoy it, but I think you should enjoy it because all of the other girls that I've been with should enjoy it. And that felt very unfair to me, that
Yeah.
his sexual pleasure was so much more important than mine. And we've since resolved that issue, just for all of you listeners to understand. Hopefully that gives you some peace of mind or some hope. But that was the reality of our marriage for the first few years.
So how did you really resolve this? So what had to change? What had to shift in order for you to be in a better place today?
Yeah. So for me, it was, the biggest shift was for me to own my own authority, so to speak, and to say, like, it doesn't matter who believes what. It matters what I believe. We can find an expert to agree with anyone's point,
Yes.
or some false belief from a previous version of our lives. So what I was doing, and what I've seen a lot of women do, is trying to convince my husband that my beliefs and my desires mattered, rather than believing that for myself. And I think that was the big difference between my friends who were having better sex lives and me. Was it wasn't even a question that they needed to convince him. They just knew it was true. And so, it it might seem a little bit cold and uncaring to be like, sorry, dude. Like if we're both not happy with this, then it's not going to move forward. I that's kind of what it had to come to. If we're not both having a good experience, then it's it's just not going to happen. So if until you're willing to meet me in a place that is going to work for both of us.
Yep. So, how did you end up learning what orgasms feel like and how to create self pleasure even for yourself when he's not around, right? I think like that can really shift things. The minute we know what it feels like to orgasm and what makes us turned on and learning our body, that really opens that door to be able to experience that with another person.
Yeah. So I grew up in a culture that taught that masturbation was a sin.
Yeah.
And it was really helpful for me to find a sex therapist within my religious tradition that was kind of breaking that myth. And the way that she taught it was approachable enough to me that, it's a woman. Men grow up from the time they're little boys, like their sexual organ is an external organ. It's very accessible. It's very easy for them to figure out how
Right.
it works and what feels good. And women need to have that same experience,
Yes.
ability and experience. So just destigmatizing the shame of it. And it doesn't necessarily have to be like a very indulgent and selfish activity. It can
Right.
be something that helps you to learn more about your sexuality so that you can enjoy sexuality more with your husband. And then also we did go and see a sex therapist at that time. It was after we had our second kid. And I was kind of like, I'm not going to do this for the rest of my life. I'm not going to have this kind of sex this way forever. It's just not going to be okay with me. And having that third party, that expert third party talk to my husband about how much foreplay women really need, especially when they're learning about their bodies. And honestly, he was kind of a little bit of a turd about the whole thing. And he's like, oh boy, he told me this and it really hurt my feelings. He was like, oh yeah, I told my friend, okay, now I'm going to have to give Sharon an hour of foreplay during sex. And now I look at it and I'm like foreplay should be enjoyable for both of us. Like we should, the whole thing should be a good experience for both of us. And just me changing my belief system around that and realizing also that those beliefs that he had, it's not that he's this caveman jerk. This is
Right.
how society looks at things.
Yep.
And just realizing and not having too much judgment of him and where he's coming from, having a lot of understanding and compassion, and also looking at it as a way of this is an invitation to something that's going to be better for both of us. I'm not like trying to drag you out of something that works better for you into something that works better for me. I'm inviting you into an experience that's going to be better for everyone.
Yes, I love that. And that's the thing. I think a lot of times people approach sex as a job, and they're like, oh, I don't have time for that. I'm too tired for it. But when you realize that it really just charges your battery and brings you so much more together and so much more connected when it's good, right? When it's good and it's connective and it's from that heart coherent place that you really, that intimacy place that creates so much more and bring so much more to your life and to who you are, because that's such a huge part of you. I know that a lot of times, like after me and my husband have sex, I feel like my creative juices are just flowing. It like opens this gate open in my mind too to get more information and more channeling, and it's it's amazing. So, what are tips that you can give our listeners? Maybe they're in the same situation. They don't really know even how to talk to their husband. Like, what is maybe one or two tips that you can give to open that door?
Yeah, well, I think the first one is to don't look at it as taking something away from them so that you can have more. It's not like a pie and there's like limited number of pieces of pie. And if he's happy, then you can't be. But look at it as an invitation to something more for both of you. And it's tricky to get there. It's a little bit messy for sure. And the other tip I have is to just expect that it's going to be messy. When you're changing dynamics in a relationship, especially a close personal relationship, like a marriage or, committed partnership, we get really comfortable with the way things are. And that familiarity, even if it is uncomfortable, at least we know what we have. So changing those dynamics is inherently messy. And I think that's why it's so important to have some sort of experienced professional to support you. We had a therapist at a certain time, and working with some person who's a little bit removed from it to help you see things more clearly and objectively can really help you to work through a lot of those feelings and that uncertainty when you're working on changing any dynamic in a relationship, whether it's sexual or communication or something with your kids or whatever it might be.
Yes, I love that so much. Thank you so much for this eye-opening conversation. So if our listeners want to find you and to know more about what you do, how can they reach you?
Yeah, so I am across all of my social media platforms, which is really mostly just Facebook and Instagram. You can find me at Keep Talking Revolution is the handle there. And that is also my podcast. So I have a podcast where I talk every 2 weeks. I talk about a lot of these kind of communication dynamics and what you can do to really foster growth and healthy relationships with your spouse or partner and also other loved ones. So my website is keeptalkingrevolution.com, and then on Instagram and Facebook, I'm also Keep Talking Revolution.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. If this was a contribution to you, please share, like, love, and comment. I would love to hear from you more, and make sure to follow us on Morph Healing. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and remember, you are here for a reason. I see you. Love, more.